I've spent the last 3 years of my life looking at Jackson Thorne through a 4K lens, and let me tell you, even in ultra high definition, the man is a total blur. My name is Leo, and I was Jackson's head of media. I was the guy who edited out his heavy breathing when he walked up a flight of stairs. I was the guy who color graded his skin to make him look like a bronze god instead of a guy who drinks 4 energy drinks before noon. Jaxson the Titan Thorne was the king of the alpha grift. He had 5 million followers across 4 platforms, and he made his money by telling 20-year-old guys that they were weak, pathetic, and feminine unless they bought his $2,000 Titan Mastery course. His brand was built on unapologetic masculinity. He wore $5,000 suits without socks, smoked cigars that cost more than my rent, and talked incessantly about predatory drive and warrior DNA. But I knew the truth. Jaxson was a guy named Derek from a middle-class suburb in Ohio who had spent 6 months in an acting class before realizing it was easier to play a character on Instagram than on a stage. He didn't own the private jets. We rented them for 4-hour content blocks while they were parked in the hangar. He didn't own the mansions. They were Airbnbs we'd scrub of any personal traces before filming. The mask started to crack during a live-streamed Alpha Summit. Jaxson was in the middle of a rant about how most military veterans were conditioned sheep who lacked the entrepreneurial wolf spirit. "See, these guys, they follow orders," Jaxson said, leaning back in his velvet chair, swirling a glass of expensive-looking amber liquid that was actually apple juice. "They're betas. They have a boss. I don't have a boss. If you put me in a combat zone, I'd be the one leading. Why? Because I have the natural instinct of a predator. Most of these warriors wouldn't last a day in my world." The chat was moving too fast to read, but one comment got pinned by a rogue moderator. It was from a verified account, Sergeant Miller. Miller was a retired Green Beret, a guy with a chest full of medals and a face that looked like it was carved out of granite. He had a modest following where he taught actual bushcraft and survival. His comment was simple. "You've got a lot of bark for a dog that's never left the porch, Jaxson. If you're a predator, prove it. Join me for a 72-hour trek through the Devil's Throat and the Cascades. No cameras but yours, no luxury, just 72 hours of warrior DNA versus the mountain. If you finish, I'll donate $500,000 to a charity of your choice. If you quit, you admit the Titan is a cardboard cutout." Jackson's face went pale for a microsecond, the kind of pale that only a cameraman notices. But his ego was a runaway train. He looked directly into the lens, giving that smug, narrow-eyed look he'd practiced in the mirror for years. "Miller," Jaxson sneered, "pack your bags, old man. I'll show you what a real alpha looks like when the safety is off." The internet exploded. My phone didn't stop vibrating for 48 hours. Jaxson was terrified behind the scenes, screaming at his assistants to find a way out of it. But it was too late. Sponsors were watching. His Titan members were demanding blood. We arrived at the trailhead 3 days later. The North Cascades looked like the wall of the world, jagged, snow-capped peaks that seemed to mock the very idea of an alpha. Sergeant Miller was already there. He didn't have a $5,000 suit. He wore faded flannel, battered boots, and a rucksack that looked like it had been through 3 wars. He stood there, perfectly still, watching as our 3 black SUV convoy pulled up like we were arriving at the Oscars. Jaxson stepped out, wearing what he thought was survival gear. It was a $3,000 tactical outfit from a boutique brand in Milan, perfectly pressed, jet black, with Titan embroidered on gold on the chest. He had a knife on his belt that looked like a prop from a fantasy movie. "You ready, Thorne?" Miller asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried more weight than Jackson's loudest roar. "I was born ready," Jaxson said, motioning for me to get the camera in close. "Let's give the fans what they want. Leo, make sure you capture the moment the hero realizes he can't keep up with a Titan." Miller didn't smile. He just checked his watch. "Rule 1, I set the pace. Rule 2, we carry our own gear. No assistance, no food drops. Let's move." The first mile was a steep, winding ascent through old-growth forest. For the first 20 minutes, Jaxson was doing his alpha routine. He was talking to the camera, puffing his chest out, lecturing his followers about mental fortitude and dominating the terrain. "See this? Jaxson panted, pointing at a moderately steep incline. Most men would be gasping for air, but when you've optimized your testosterone like I have, this is nothing. This is a walk in the park. But by mile 3, the optimization began to fail. The Cascades don't care about your followers. The air got thinner and the trail turned into a brutal scramble over wet roots and loose shale. Jackson's tactical boots, designed for fashion, not function, started giving him blisters almost immediately. I could see the sweat pouring down his face, washing away the bronzer we'd applied that morning. His breathing went from composed to a ragged, wet wheeze. Miller, meanwhile, moved like a mountain goat. He wasn't even breathing hard. He'd stop every 20 minutes, not to rest, but to check the map or scan the horizon. "You okay back there, Titan?" Miller asked, looking back. "Fine," Jaxson snapped, leaning against a tree, his face the color of an overripe tomato. "Just checking the light for the shot. Leo, did you get that angle?" "I got it, Jax," I said, suppressing a smirk. The camera doesn't lie, and right now, the camera was capturing a man who looked like he was about to have a heart attack. By noon, we reached a river crossing. The water was glacial, milky blue, and moving fast. There was no bridge, just a series of slick, moss-covered boulders. "We cross here," Miller said, stepping into the water without hesitation. He moved with a terrifying economy of motion, his boots finding grip where there seemed to be none. He reached the other side and turned around, crossing his arms. Jaxson stood at the edge of the bank. He looked at the water, then at his $3,000 boots, then at the camera. He knew the alpha thing to do was to charge across, but I could see his knees shaking. "It's contaminated," Jaxson said, trying to find a dignified way to stall. "We should find a cleaner route for the gear. I don't want to risk the media equipment." "The gear is waterproof, and the water is fine. Come on, Alpha, show me that predatory drive." Jaxson took a deep breath, sucked in his gut for the camera, and stepped onto the first rock. It went wrong instantly. His fashionable soles had zero traction on the wet moss. His foot slipped and he went down hard, his knee slamming into the granite. He didn't let out a warrior's grunt. He let out a high-pitched, strangled yelp. He scrambled back to the bank, clutching his knee, his black Titan suit now covered in freezing gray mud. I think I tore my ACL," Jaxson gasped, his eyes wide with genuine panic. "Leo, stop filming. Stop the feed." "The feed is live, Jax," I said, holding the stabilizer steady. "The fans are loving the authenticity." Miller waded back across, looking down at Jaxson with a look of pure, unadulterated boredom. He reached down, felt Jackson's knee through the fabric, and squeezed. "Ow, damn it," Jaxson shrieked. "It's a bruise, Thorne. Your ACL is fine, but your dignity is looking a little shaky. You want to call the helicopter now? Admit you're a fraud in front of all those kids who spent their rent money on your course?" Jaxson looked at the camera. He looked at the thousands of comments scrolling by. Is he crying? Why is he clutching his knee like a toddler? I paid $2,000 for this. The fear of losing his empire was momentarily greater than his fear of the mountain. He stood up, wobbling. I'm fine. I was just testing your reaction. It's a psychological tactic. Alpha leadership. You wouldn't understand." He tried to step back into the water, but his confidence was gone. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. He eventually crawled across the boulders on his hands and knees, looking less like a titan than more like a very expensive crab. By the time we set up camp at 6,000 feet, the temperature had plummeted. The wind was ripping through the pines, a low, haunting moan that seemed to vibrate in the bone. Jaxson was shivering uncontrollably. He didn't know how to set up his tactical tent. He struggled for 40 minutes, eventually getting tangled in the nylon and falling over while Miller watched from a distance, boiling a simple pot of pine needle tea. "You want some help, Thorne?" Miller asked. "I've got it," Jaxson yelled from inside a heap of collapsed tent poles. I'm just optimizing the airflow." Finally, Miller walked over and with 3 deft movements snapped the tent into place. He looked at Jaxson, who was curled in a ball on the ground, his teeth chattering. "Tomorrow's the hard part," Miller said. "We're going over the ridge, 3,000 feet of vertical gain, loose scree, no trail. You sure your optimized testosterone is up for it?" Jaxson didn't answer. He just crawled into his tent and zipped the fly shut. Later that night, I was sitting by the small fire Miller had built. I was backing up the footage, watching the clips of Jaxson slipping, wheezing, and whining. It was the most honest footage I'd ever shot of him. "He's not going to make it, is he?" I asked Miller. Miller looked into the flames. "Men like him never do. They spend so much time building a facade that they forget to build a foundation. He's spent his life in front of a mirror. The mountain doesn't have mirrors, it only has truth." Suddenly, we heard a sound from Jackson's tent. It wasn't the sound of a man sleeping. It was the sound of a man muffled by a sleeping bag, sobbing. Is he crying?" I whispered. Miller sighed and stood up. "He's realizing that the Titan doesn't exist, and Derek is scared of the dark." Batch 1 ends with the camera zooming in on Jackson's tent, the golden Titan logo shaking in the wind, while the muffled sounds of a grown man breaking down echo against the indifferent peaks of the Cascades. The sun didn't rise over the Cascades. It bled through a thick, suffocating layer of gray mist. I woke up at 5 a.m. to the sound of Sergeant Miller chopping deadwood for a small morning fire. I crawled out of my sleeping bag, every joint in my body screaming, but when I looked over at Jackson's tent, the Titan was nowhere to be seen. Actually, that's not true. I could hear him. It was a low, rhythmic moaning coming from inside the nylon. I tapped on the tent fly. "Jax, we're live in 10. The followers are waiting for the morning routine of a Predator segment." There was a long silence. Then the zipper moved with agonizing slowness. Jackson's face poked out. I kid you not, he looked like a different human being. The alpha bouffant, that perfectly coiffed hair he spent 40 minutes on every morning, was a matted, greasy bird's nest. His face was puffy, his eyes were red-shot from crying, and he had a giant cold sore blooming on his lip. "Leo, tell him I can't move. My legs, they're paralyzed. It's rhabdomyolysis. It's a high-level athlete condition. I need a medevac." Miller walked over, holding a tin cup of pine needle tea. He didn't even look down. "It's not rhabdo, Thorne. It's DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. You're stiff because you've never actually used your muscles for anything other than bicep curls in front of a ring light. Get up. We have 8 miles of vertical scramble today." "I'm injured," Jaxson hissed, his alpha persona flickering back for a second like a dying light bulb. "Do you know how much my insurance is worth? If I permanent damage these legs, I'll sue you into the dirt." Miller leaned down, his face inches from Jackson's. The sergeant's eyes were like 2 pieces of flint. "The only thing getting damaged today is your ego. You signed the waiver. Now you can walk out on your own 2 feet, or I can drag you behind me like a sack of laundry. But we're not calling a helicopter because you've got a cramp. Move." We started the ascent toward the high divide. This wasn't a trail anymore. It was a scramble, which is hiker speak for climbing a mountain of loose rocks that want to slide into the abyss. Within an hour, Jaxson was down. He sat on a rock, ripped off his $3,000 tactical boots, and let out a whimper that would have made a puppy feel embarrassed. His feet were a disaster. Because he'd insisted on wearing designer hiking boots that hadn't been broken in, his heels were just raw, weeping meat. "I need moleskin," he shouted at me. "Leo, check the media bag. Where is the medical kit?" "You said you didn't need one, Jax," I reminded him, keeping the camera focused on his mangled feet. "Remember, you said pain is just a beta's way of saying they aren't optimized?" Jaxson looked at the camera lens with pure, unadulterated hatred. If looks could kill, I'd have been buried under that shale. Miller walked back down the slope. He didn't offer sympathy. He pulled a roll of duct tape from his pack. "Wrap them in this. It'll hurt like hell when you take it off, but it'll stop the friction."
Duct tape? Jaxson gasped. That's not medical grade. I have a brand deal with a pharmaceutical company. I can't be seen using duct tape. Then walk barefoot, Miller said, turning back around. Jaxson wrapped his feet in the silver tape, sobbing quietly as the adhesive touched the raw skin. For the next 3 hours, every step he took was accompanied by a wet, squelching sound and a muffled groan. He wasn't talking about warrior DNA anymore. He was talking about his bed. He kept muttering about his Egyptian cotton sheets and his recovery pod back in LA. By noon, we hit the ridgeline. The wind was gusting at 40 miles per hour, and there was a sheer drop of about 2,000 feet to the left. Jaxson flat out refused to walk. He started crawling on all fours, clutching the rocks like he was trying to merge with the mountain. "Leo," he hissed, beckoning me closer while Miller was scouting ahead. "Leo, turn the camera off. Seriously, turn it off." I lowered the gimbal. "What's up, Jax?" "I'll give you $50,000, he whispered, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. "Right now. I'll wire it the second we get bars. Just tell the followers the signal cut out. Tell them we had a security breach and had to evacuate. I'll say I fought off a mountain lion or something. I'll make you a partner in Titan Media. Just please get me off this mountain." I looked at him. This was the man who had told millions of young men that integrity is the bedrock of the alpha. This was the man who sold courses on unbreakable honor. "I can't do that, Jax," I said. "The stream is buffered. It's uploading in chunks via the satellite link. Everyone saw you crawl the last half mile. They're calling you the tactical turtle in the chat." Jackson's face didn't go red this time. It went gray. The realization that he couldn't buy his way out of reality was finally sinking in. He looked over the edge of the ridge, and for a second, I thought he was going to faint. "I'm gonna die here," he whimpered. "I'm a millionaire. I have a custom-painted G-Wagon. I shouldn't die in the dirt like a peasant." The weather in the Cascades can change in minutes. By 3 p.m., the gray mist had turned into a full-blown mountain storm. Sleet began to pelt us, turning the loose shale into a slide of frozen ball bearings. Miller stopped. His face was grim. "We need to find a lee-side shelter. If we stay on the ridge, we'll get hypothermic in an hour." We found a shallow cave, more of a rock overhang, and huddled together. Jaxson was shivering so hard his teeth were literally chipping. He was wearing 3 layers of high-tech gear, but he was wet from sweat and fear, and the cold was moving in for the kill. Miller started a small, efficient stove to boil water. "Thorne, get out of those wet clothes. Put on your dry spares." "I didn't pack spares," Jaxson whispered. Miller froze. "What do you mean you didn't pack spares? I gave you a mandatory gear list." "I needed the space in my pack for the gold-plated dumbbells, for the Titan Strength photo shoot at the summit. I thought we'd be back by now." The silence in that cave was deafening. Miller looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flash of genuine anger in the sergeant's eyes. Not the professional hardness he'd shown before, but the disgust of a man who realized he was babysitting a person who had traded his survival for a prop.
"You're a dead man without a script, aren't you?" Miller said quietly. That was the breaking point. Jaxson didn't snap back. He didn't try to alpha his way out. He just collapsed into a heap in the corner of the cave and began to howl. It wasn't a cry. It was a full-blown psychological break. "I hate this," he screamed, kicking at his $3,000 backpack. "I hate the mountains. I hate the followers. I hate the cigars. They taste like burnt hair, Leo. I hate them." He turned to the camera, which I still had running on its tripod. "You want to see an alpha?" Jaxson screamed at the lens, snot running down his nose. "There is no alpha. I'm Derek. I'm Derek from Ohio. I worked at a car rental desk until I realized you idiots would pay me if I insulted you. I rented the cars. I rented the planes. I don't even have a girlfriend. I pay models to stand near me at clubs." He was hyperventilating now. Miller reached over and grabbed him by the shoulders, shaking him once, hard. "Calm down, Derek," Miller said. The use of his real name seemed to deflate Jaxson instantly. He went limp, sobbing into Miller's flannel shirt like a child. "I just want to go home," Jaxson sobbed. "I want a cheeseburger. I want my mom. Please, don't let me die out here."
"You aren't going to die," Miller said, his voice returning to that steady, calm baseline. "But Jaxson Thorne is dead. You understand that? He didn't make it past the first ridge." The descent, the walk of shame. The final morning was the longest walk of my life. The storm had passed, leaving the mountains glistening and beautiful, but the man walking between us was a ghost. Jaxson, or Derek as he was now, didn't say a word. He walked with his head down, his Titan jacket ripped and stained with mud and salt. He didn't look at the camera, he didn't look at the scenery. He just stared at the heels of Miller's boots, following him with the blind devotion of a lost dog. When we finally rounded the last bend and saw the trailhead, the 3 black SUVs were still there. Jackson's security team, 2 guys who were actually just out-of-work actors, stepped out ready to film the hero's return. "Boss," one of them shouted, holding up a gimbal, "we're live. Give us the warrior roar." Jaxson didn't roar. He didn't even look up. He walked straight past them, climbed into the back of the lead SUV, and curled up on the leather seat. He didn't ask for his phone. He didn't ask about the chat. Miller stood by the SUV door. He looked at me, then at the camera. "You got it all, Leo?" I said every frame. "Post it," Miller said. "Not for the hate, but for the kids who think a loud voice and an expensive suit make a man. Show them what happens when the facade hits the frost." I uploaded the full, unedited 72-hour cut that night. I titled it "The End of the Titan." It wasn't just a viral video, it was a cultural reset. The Titan Mastery website crashed within minutes, not from traffic, but from thousands of people filing for chargebacks. The sponsors dropped him before the sun came up. The alpha community, which had been his kingdom, turned on him with a ferocity that was honestly kind of terrifying to watch. Jaxson, Derek, as he was now, disappeared. He deleted his accounts. He sold the G-Wagon, which it turns out he was 3 months behind on payments for anyway. Last I heard, he was back in Ohio working in a warehouse. People ask me if I feel bad for him. I don't. I think about the thousands of young guys who were skipping meals or ignoring their families because they thought they had to be like the Titan. I think about the sergeant who spent 72 hours of his life saving a man who had insulted everything he stood for. A week after we got back, I got a package in the mail. It was a tin cup, the one Miller used to boil pine needle tea. Inside was a small note. "The mountain doesn't care about your followers. It only cares about the truth. Stay grounded, Leo. Miller." I still have that cup on my desk. Every time I see a new alpha coach popping up on my feed, talking about predatory mindsets and dominating the landscape, I just smile. Because I know what happens when those guys meet a real mountain. I know what happens when the Titan has to face the dark. And let me tell you, it sounds a lot like Derek from Ohio crying for his mom in a cave.